Welcome, everybody. This is the official start. And I have this beautiful slide. We were discussing quite a bit what would be the quote at the beginning of the book. And we landed on this. We might still change it. And what I want from life is compassion, a flow between myself and others based on mutual giving from the heart. For those of you who don't know, Marshall Rosenberg is the one who started nonviolent communication. And that brings me to one big thing about the book, and it is for me an integration of nonviolent communication, NVC, and sociocracy. So there's a lot of NVC in there. Sometimes when I reread it, I was a little scared that it might be too radical for people, but whatever. I guess maybe here I'm also going to do a quick intro into who we are. So Jennifer, Ted, Jerry, we started Sociocracy for almost 2 years ago as a nonprofit. Our intention was to make Sociocracy more accessible, and that's basically in two ways. One is financially more accessible, so more affordable, and the other one is making more materials that are easy to understand, accessible online, so that people can learn themselves and do whatever they want to do with it. So we have a lot of trust that people take what they think they can use and they use it, and we have confidence that people will ask if they have questions or if it's not flowing the way they were hoping for. So, what's new in the book? First, I want to say something, and that goes together with our mission and our aim. So why write a book at all? And the reason for that, there were three reasons for it. One is that we wanted to show sociocratic tools in context, because there are a lot of instructions floating online and taught in workshops, and we've contributed some to that too. But what we noticed is that although you can mix and match in sociocracy, you can take a piece and only use that, or take 3 pieces or modify them a little. It really helps to put it all in context, because what the good thing about sociocratic tools is that they all dovetail and mutually support each other. So showing that in context made a lot of sense. The other thing was that we kept putting out content and we started contradicting ourselves, at least for terminology, because there's a lot of terminology floating around and we don't contradict that. So we've been using whatever made sense in a particular moment. And at some point we were getting frustrated, or at least I was getting frustrated with myself. I'm like, okay, I want to just have one coherent design and one set of terminology that is my default go-to option. So creating less confusion, more coherence was one of the reasons to write a book. And then the other one is very aligned with our mission. Everything in one spot, usable, affordable, easy to access. So that, for the price of, like, the lowest price being the ebook, you can get all the information in one spot. So this is going to help people for whom this is the first time they hear about sociocracy, because the overall content, like the chapters, is very much aligned with what sociocracy typically is. First is organizational structure. So how do teams that each have their own work, how do they know about each other? How do we create strong teams without creating silos? And I'm going to go through each of those headings again and tell you what we did with that. But for now, this is the overall overview. One big aspect of sociocracy is consent decision-making. Somebody already mentioned it in the check-in here. It's a decision is made when there's no objection, and there's a lot to say about it, and also how to even get to the point that you can even make a decision. So how do you prepare a proposal? Then we typically mention feedback and learning as the third big element of sociocracy, because feedback and learning is baked into sociocracy. Like we are in constant development and evaluate what we've been doing. So that's a big aspect of it. And that is also where a lot of NVC is in the book, nonviolent communication. Meetings. I find that sometimes that has been has not gotten enough attention. Although for most people, what an organization is the meetings. So we paid more attention to that and really showed how meetings work well. Roles and selections. So for instance, facilitator, leader, representatives, and so on, and how to select them. For those of you who have gotten some training, you know what I'm talking about. Implementation. And you see there's not a lot about implementation. I'm going to talk more about that in a sec. So what are we saying about organizational structure? For those, this is the what happened so far part. What Sociocracy does is it puts authority into small groups, circles we call them. And that means a circle gets an aim, something they're supposed to do, and a domain, which is the area of authority that they have. And then they go do it, and they don't have to check back with the big group unless there's a strong reason for it, because it might be bigger than what they are allowed to decide on their own. And then we connect those circles with a process that we call double linking. And we're really keeping all of that intact. We're talking a little bit more about roles than we in SOFA have done so far. And we're introducing one piece of terminology. And I've really, with every piece of terminology that I introduced in the book, or that we introduced, I asked myself 10 times, do I really have to add another piece of jargon or change jargon? Because jargon is often what makes it hard for people to access information. This one, however, we decided, so top circle, which is the board in Sociocracy, equivalent to the board, we're now calling mission circle instead of top circle, because my observation was that top circle, there's just the term was driving people away, because it looks very much like hierarchy. And mission circle, if you think about it, is actually more aligned with what it actually is. It's actually more a better descriptor than top circle is. And I think it is. So the way we're looking at it is the mission circle, so the counterpart of the board, is keeping the organization true to its mission. It's translating the mission, the overall thing we want to do, into aims, what we actually do. And those aims are then being carried out by circles. And the coordination between circles is done in the general circle. So they keep the organization true to its aim. Okay, so in that way, mission circle seems like a better descriptor, because it describes what the circle is doing and doesn't assume hierarchy where there is no hierarchy, really, at least not in the traditional sense. All right, I think. Yes, the book is also talking a little more about organizations of organizations than it has been done before. So there's a whole like broccoli kind of construct of how organizations can be members of organizations. For instance, if we build regional networks that organizations that then team up to build national or international organizations. All no rocket science, but I've hardly ever seen it spelled out in the way that we've done it. All right, take a deep breath. I'm going to consent decision-making. One big aspect is how to deal with objections. And often we just assume that groups know how to do that, and we're spelling it out a little better. An objection is when we have a proposal and somebody says, no, that's not working for me. I can't do my work if we say yes to this proposal. The cool thing about Sociocracy is how it captures objections as saying yes to improving the proposal. And that is, again, something that has been said before. So we're not saying anything new, but the intention in the book was to say it well so people can really take that in, because it's a vital mindset behind Sociocracy to deal with objections in a constructive way. Generating policy. There's a separate webinar or like what's new in the book kind of event about generating policy and decision making. So I'm just gonna touch on it so that you have maybe even less than an idea of what's happening there. But this is actually a visual from the book. And what the idea is that we often or too often run towards decisions or proposal ideas. And it is useful to slow groups down in the beginning and to make sure they first complete the step of understanding, like understanding the problem, understanding the issue, or understanding a proposal. So the first step is understanding, and everybody, you can see that in those like swirly lines, everybody will have their own way of getting there. The important thing is that we make sure everybody is there, and then we go to the next step. So I hope you can see my cursor. So here are all the swirly lines, and we make sure everybody has understood before we go to the next step. Then we explore, and we have all kinds of ideas of what we could be doing, okay? And at the end, we make sure that we're all on the same page again, so that then we can, as a group together, go towards decision making, and then see what we wanted to do with it. So that's just giving you a very, very broad overview of how we're capturing group processes in general into these 3 steps that are very aligned with classic sociocracy and other frameworks. And that's the words that we've been using here. Take a deep breath. Next chapter, feedback and learning. I've already said that. Integration of NVC and sociocracy. And to me, I'm just going to say one thing about this. What is really important to me is to understand that sociocracy, what it does is governance. So it provides a way of operating and making decisions. And for instance, creating opportunities for feedback. What it doesn't do is teach people how to give feedback effectively so that it can be heard and received. So it only says, you know, sociocracy as a system only says give feedback or evaluate, but it doesn't say how to do the interpersonal aspect of it or how to even frame evaluation and feedback as something that is not anything that has to be painful. So we talk quite a bit about that because I find it tricky to use sociocracy with all the feedback that we're using there without being able to deliver feedback in a way that it can be useful. By the way, you're allowed to interrupt me here in case you want to say something.
Now you tell me.
Did you want to say something?
No.
All right. Oh, and then meeting format. This is something cool. This is actually where people started perking up. In Brazil, we just spent 3 weeks teaching in Brazil. And that's when people perked up. And it's funny how I think people like, what we all need in meetings is just little things that make life easier. And I'm almost embarrassed by how ridiculously simple it is. I am actually embarrassed, but it is really useful. Yes, people are like, oh, that's so cool. Okay, I'm going to tell you about it. So this is the classic meeting format. And we're starting with check-in. So for those who are not familiar with sociocracy, we do a round where everybody says how they are. Okay, and then typically we consent to the agenda, what I wanted to do here but couldn't. We go through agenda items and, oops, and where are we here? And we do a meeting evaluation, closing. Okay, what we're adding here is two steps. One is the admin phase, and admin actually I turned into an acronym, and that is what people find so cool, because now, without having to know anything, you can just memorize this thing, and that is A stands for attendance. Who's here, who's not here? D stands for duration. How long is this meeting? Have you ever been in a meeting where at the beginning you argued about how long you said this meeting would be, which is totally draining to do at the beginning of a meeting? Minutes. Do we know what happened to last time's minutes? Was there any disagreement about the minutes? Like, have they been sent out? Are the minutes Have the minutes been dealt with? I, for information or announcements, is there anything else you would like to say? Like, this is the time to mention your party next Saturday. Like, don't do it in the middle of the meeting. Do it now, before we actually start. And N is next meeting. So when is our next meeting? Do we know that? And so we get all of that stuff out of the way before we jump into content. And somebody was actually in Brazil able to translate it into Portuguese while still forming admin. You can do it in your own language too, German, for instance. All right. Another tiny step that is added is a little wrap-up kind of thing where we just look like, okay, so which of the agenda items have we actually completed, and did we do what we said we do? What carries over to the next meeting? That's better described in the book. And we added some structure to the content items, which I'm not going to go into now because we actually also have something about that, like an event just about that. But it is looking at the kinds of decisions or the kinds of agenda items that we have. All right, take a deep breath again. Ooh, somebody already translated it into German. I'm thrilled. Lisa, look at that. All right.
In the chat.
In the chat, yes. Roles and selections. It's all the same. We didn't change anything. For those of you who have not been exposed to sociocracy, selections, the way we elect people into roles, are by far my favorite process. They're very different from anything we're used to, especially if you're used to voting, like for instance, voting into the role of the board president, like secret ballot and all of that. Sociocratic selections are very different. And we're not changing much about it because I don't see any way of improving them. The only thing that we did add is sometimes things come up for people because I guess it's just because we're not used to it. And so we added, this is just a part of the table of contents here. We added some frequently asked questions that we often get about selections, and also some emotional stuff like what happens if kind of things. Because I think it's useful for people. It's a very powerful process, but there's some things to keep in mind about it. Anyway, I think we're almost through now. Implementation. That's the last one. Last breath. All right. So our chapter on implementation is rather generic for the simple reason that every organization is slightly different. So saying anything too specific would just mean to not take in the diversity of organizations and situations that we find. What it does do is show in broad strokes what you can look out for, like what do you have to attune to that could point to a more systemic issue. And that also at the same time gives groups a sense of what sociocracy is supposed to feel like what are we aiming for? There's an appendix, and there are tons and tons and tons of examples. All the steps in decision-making and elections and so on are illustrated with an example of like a skit, does everybody know what a skit is? Like if you had a play, like a theater play, like Who Says What, of an imaginary group, so that you can follow a process and listen in what it would sound like.